Hello, everyone. Dr. Yonit Arthur here. You are on the Steady Coach, and it is such a privilege today to bring you this jam packed and informative interview with Annie Miller. Annie is a licensed therapist and a former chronic pain sufferer herself. She's actually trained in pain reprocessing therapy, so she is very well versed in mind body disorders. But she's here today to talk about her specialty, which is insomnia and sleep issues. I hear you cheering all the way through the screen. I know this is an issue that is so common among those of you with chronic dizziness, chronic pain, chronic other symptoms. And Annie really does an incredible job today of breaking down what insomnia is and isn't, and really how to overcome it. Annie is also trained in CBTI, which is a type of therapy that is evidence based and actually has been shown to have over an 80% success rate for insomnia. So the stuff that she shares here in this interview really works. And I hope that you walk away from this interview inspired to implement some of these tools right away to get yourself back to sleeping well. Please enjoy this interview. And as always, if you like my channel, if you enjoyed this interview, please comment, like, share, subscribe to my channel if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're listening to this on my podcast. Please follow the podcast and consider leaving it a review to make sure other people are able to find it. All right, everyone, please enjoy. Hey, Annie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great, and I am super excited to talk to you because, as I was saying to you off air, I don't know what it is, but the past week I have seen more comments on my YouTube channel about insomnia than ever. So I don't know if you sent out vibes or something, but it is the perfect time to talk about sleep issues.
I'm really glad to be here, and I hope I can provide some information that's useful.
Yeah, I know you will. But let's start just kind of from the basics so people know who you are. So can you tell me just a little bit about yourself and how you got into the mind body disorder world in the first place? Because you're not just someone who specializes in insomnia.
Right, that's right. Yeah, so my name is Annie Miller, and
Mhm.
I'm a therapist. So my training is as a licensed clinical social worker,
Mhm.
but I work as a therapist. My practice is based in the Washington, D.C. area. Um, and so how I got started in this, like most of us, right, is I had my own issues, a long journey with symptoms, pain, all the things. For me, this really all started when I was in high school, at the end of high school, which for some people can be a lot of pressure or a lot of stuff going on. And I certainly felt that, and I started having headaches and didn't know what it was and took the usual routes that everybody takes. And what I really noticed is over time, my symptoms really progressed and it stopped being just headaches and started being other symptoms, headaches being probably the primary issue that was the most, biggest problem, the most bothersome thing to me. But then it kind of snowballed like it does for other people. And um, I became a therapist. I got my master's degree. I did all my training, and I still didn't really understand the way chronic symptoms work until I had a colleague who really introduced me to this idea. And it took a while because, like many of us, it didn't initially make sense or feel like it connected. But then when it did, it was like this light bulb went off and I was like, oh, okay. And being a therapist already, I really learned as much as I could about the brain and neuroscience and how all this stuff really works together. And it was kind of this combination of things for me of like really understanding it, like getting that the brain can cause physical symptoms was a big help. And, I've looked at curable and other similar type things. But I also had the benefit of being able to take like CEU courses for, my license that were based around this as well.
Mhm.
And so now my primary focus is chronic pain. and insomnia, which I love, and trauma. And so, I kind of think of these things as going together, and being really brain-based, but that's kind of the background in my story.
Yeah, I have yet to interview anyone in our field who's like, yeah, just stumbled upon it. Never had chronic pain in my life. I feel like, I mean, we've joked about it, right? But yes, it is part of the human condition, but it seems like you have to, have had something a little more than just a single tension headache to really get what it's like to
Yeah.
go through something like that. Yes. So once you
Yeah,
learned
I
more,
agree.
did your symptoms get better?
Yes, definitely. It was a process, and when I look back on it, the process for me, I can see what was, what things were kind of holding me back from getting better and what
Mhm.
was helping me. Um, I think it was harder. I had my daughter, who's now 8, but when I first
Mhm.
had her, it was really tricky because just getting into the flow of being a mom and working at the same time, I think that is when things really got worse before they got better. But in general, yes, I feel like, I am living a very normal life. And, like other people, I have things come up from time to time. And I think of them as just being that warning sign, like it's too much right now, just pull back a little bit. But in general, yeah, I feel great.
That's good. Do you know who Dr. Rachel Zoffness is?
I
She,
don't
you don't,
know.
she's just a wonderful pain psychologist who she's done some stuff on podcast interviews. So people are familiar
Mm,
with her, but she said something recently. She posted on social media, stop calling people pain patients. Pain is
mhm.
a normal human experience. And when
Yes.
you stigmatize pain and make it into like a patient condition, then it creates all sorts of problems and expectations. Like
Mhm.
no one's going to live a pain-free life, a completely pain-free life. No one, right? But
Exactly. And we get into these modes of being perfectionistic about how our body should feel, and not only
Mhm.
feel, but look, right? But
Right, sure,
it should feel like this all the time. And if it doesn't, we have to fix it, quickly fix it,
right,
right?
right, right,
And that's a big lesson I learned, is that that's not the case for anyone ever.
right. But that doesn't mean that you can't live a full and happy life and not be held
Exactly.
back by chronic debilitating symptoms. Those are two different
Exactly.
things. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Well, okay. So you mentioned that you work with chronic pain. I'm just curious, since of course I'm talking to many people who have all sorts of symptoms, but among them primarily is dizziness. I'm wondering if you've seen that in any of your clients.
I have
Mhm,
actually, several times. I have, it's not the primary thing that I treat,
mhm,
but I kind of think of it in the same bucket as a
mhm,
lot of these other symptoms. So
mhm,
yes, it's a co-occurring symptom with a lot of other symptoms that I see. Yes.
mhm. Yeah. Did any of them have specific diagnoses, or were they just so focused on the pain and some of these other symptoms that they weren't really trying to get a diagnosis for dizziness?
I think the most common diagnosis is vertigo,
Mhm, mhm,
that I've seen. I
mhm,
haven't heard of other diagnoses that I can think of off the top of my head.
mhm.
Um,
Vestibular migraine
oh
would be a
yeah.
big, so I'm sure you see migraine as a diagnosis.
Mhm,
So
mhm,
frequently, if someone has migraine and dizziness, they'll say, "Oh, it's vestibular migraine."
mhm,
So
mhm. Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah, no, and that rings a bell too.
mhm,
I think when people work with me, it isn't necessarily the primary issue, but
mhm,
often, yeah, it's just kind of like that co-occurring
mhm.
symptom.
Yeah. Just like for me, when people, the most bothersome symptom for them is dizziness, but frequently they show up and they're like, "Yeah, I also have chronic neck pain. I also
Mhm,
have chronic back
mhm,
pain, or I had fibromyalgia before this ever started, or
mm,
chronic fatigue
exactly.
syndrome." So a lot of these things show up together, and it's really just which is the one that's really gotten your nervous system's attention the most. That
Yeah, in the spotlight, right? Which
Mhm,
one has the spotlight on it at that time?
exactly.
Mhm.
So, okay, so you mentioned insomnia, and how common are sleep issues among people with these other mind-body disorders?
Yeah, I mean, I would say very common to the point where when somebody's dealing with other mind body issues and insomnia isn't present, I'm surprised.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
there are people who don't have that
Mhm,
issue, but I would say it's more normal in the population that I work with, right, to
mhm,
have a combination.
mhm,
So I send out like a questionnaire before I start working with someone, and it's, the typical kind of questions about pain and sleep. And I also ask about things like GI issues, and oftentimes it's all of this stuff. And
mhm.
then when you really get talking about it, it's like, yeah, I've actually had that. I've had that too. Right. So we can make these connections. But as you know, and as I know, right, the source is the brain and what the brain's doing. And so I kind of think about it as just a different manifestation of what's going on in the brain, how it's showing up.
That's such a good point because I think that some people mistakenly think there's a cause and effect relationship that,
Hmm.
again, we're not saying that if you don't feel great that you can just go to sleep and feel fantastic.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing you say is that maybe the common cause is this brain thing that we're going to talk about. And
Hmm.
that could lead to a whole variety of symptoms like insomnia, dizziness, chronic pain, migraines, etc. Whereas what will often bring people to my channel is I have dizziness and it's waking me up at night with brain
Hmm.
zaps and it's the
Hmm.
dizziness's fault. That's what's causing my sleep
Right.
issues. So am I
Right.
am I on target there with what you were saying? Is that how you think about it?
Yeah. So that's what their perception is, right?
Mhm.
Of what's waking them up. Um,
Mhm.
Whereas I think it's probably more the brain, but because I hear that all the time with pain, right? I have
Mhm.
back pain. The back pain wakes me up.
Mhm.
Um, but I think what I want to be able to talk to you about is if you're sleepy enough and if you can really learn the habits and strategies to help sleep,
Mhm.
then those things won't wake you up anymore because your body is going to need sleep and sleep will happen regardless of what else is going on.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. That's already hopefully people are already perking their ears up and saying, "Wow, okay, that's a different way to think about it." And again, we're not in any way you and I both work with people with these kinds of conditions and symptoms all the time, and we're not implying that it's comfortable to feel the way that you are and it's not your fault you're having sleep issues, but maybe the sleep issues and the other symptoms have a common cause rather than the symptoms causing the sleep issues.
Exactly. And it's really hard. I mean, people struggle with insomnia and, kind of resign themselves to be lifelong insomniacs. And that's how they categorize themselves or
Yeah.
describe themselves. And it's really hard. No, yeah, I would not think it's easy, but in any way to struggle with sleep. But I do think there are things that can help.
Yes.
That's the silver lining with this is there are strategies that are proven to help sleep.
Yes. And we're going to talk about those. But before we do, can
Okay.
you define insomnia for me? Because is having like a bad night's sleep insomnia? What if you have two bad nights sleep? Like how do we know when someone has a sleep issue? When does it
Yeah.
become a sleep issue?
So insomnia is really either so a lot of people have trouble falling asleep. So that means like you're, tossing and turning in bed at the beginning of the night.
Mhm.
Other people have trouble staying asleep. You fall asleep fine, you wake up and then you just can't get back to sleep. And then for other people, it's like they want to sleep till a certain time and they're waking up like an hour or two before their alarm, not able to get back to sleep. So, trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, or waking up early.
Mhm.
And, typically we say at least a few nights a week. And when it's chronic, this is going on for more than 3 months.
Okay.
So everyone, just like what we were talking about with pain, everyone has bad night's sleep. There is no such thing as perfect sleep. No one out
Mhm.
there ever has perfect sleep.
Mhm.
Even, behavioral sleep specialists do not have perfect sleep. It just doesn't exist. But if this is a chronic problem, meaning like you are dealing with this several nights a week for more than 3 months, yeah, that's a sleep issue that you could use, these strategies to work with.
Yes. Okay. So when you say, and I again, I can't wait to talk about some of these strategies. So there's already something tricky here, because one of the things that we talk about with helping people with mind body conditions is not to overly focus on the symptoms. So I'm curious, before we start diving into some of the specifics, how do you help people implement strategies without becoming like super hung up on their insomnia and obsessing about it?
hmm This is hard because probably, and I know this for sure, every article out there about sleep tells us we need to get this amount of sleep and we need to prioritize
Yes.
it. And if you don't prioritize it, something really bad is going to
Horrible things
happen.
are going to happen. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So I kind of talk to people about that piece really upfront. We all know, we've all had, times where we pulled all-nighters for one reason or another. When we're younger, it's easier, but, nothing terrible happens. I talk about things like if people who have a newborn just don't sleep for long periods of time. And all these people out there are not dropping dead suddenly, right? This is just not happening. So, one of the things that we don't really think about is that insomnia co-occurs with stress and anxiety, right? These stress and anxiety are often the drivers, and it's very hard to separate, lack of sleep from stress and anxiety. And so I think we need to think about the whole picture rather than poor sleep are causing all these health problems. There's so many other things here.
Such a
And
good point. Such a
if
good
we
point.
don't sleep well, you're tired, you don't feel great, maybe you're a little slower, maybe you know things don't come as easily, maybe some people describe being like clumsier, but nothing bad happens. That's the extent of it. Right now, if you have to drive a long distance or you're a pilot or a surgeon, these things are a little different because other people's lives are, impacted by how you're feeling. But in general, overall, we need to reduce the danger signal we have around poor sleep because it just isn't that big of a deal.
Oh my gosh. I just I just want people to rewind and listen to that about 5 times about that. And so it made me feel calm to hear you say that, because just like everyone else in this space, I'm thinking about my health, I'm thinking about my wellness. The people who have symptoms are, of course, thinking about their health and wellness even more. And
Yeah.
as you said, we're all getting these messages, oh, Alzheimer's disease, and it's worse than smoking. I don't even know. I made that one up, but I'm sure someone said it. People get so caught up in this, and as you said, it's so easy to start integrating that fear with the I'm not going to get better fear. My symptoms
Yes.
aren't going to get better, and oh my gosh, if I get a bad night's sleep, what does this mean about my recovery from my other symptoms? It gets so wrapped up in it.
Exactly. And if I don't get a good night's sleep, I'm going to have more pain or I'm going to have more dizziness. I, automatically feel that way. And I would encourage people, test it out. It is not always true. It just isn't. It's just not a surefire connection to a symptom if you don't get a good night's sleep. There's so much more involved.
Again, I'm so happy to hear you say that. I had a bad night's sleep this week, and even I caught myself falling into that catastrophizing cycle the next morning. Oh, I'm gonna have such a terrible day. I'm gonna be so
Mhm.
tired. I'm gonna get a headache. I mean, like, and
Yeah.
I do this for a living. I know that me predicting all these problems is not going to actually help me. But it's so good to hear you say that.
No,
So
I'm glad.
poor sleep isn't that big of a deal, guys. Just internalize that for a second. And we're not saying we don't want you to sleep for have problems sleeping for 30 years, but like you're saying,
Right.
especially in the shorter term right now, while you're dealing with these other things, let's put it into perspective.
Yeah, we need to make the brain view it as just not a big deal, because the bigger deal you feel like it is,
Mm-hmm.
the less likely you are to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is not only true, but it helps in the whole process, right? So your brain needs to see this as, okay, so I'm awake. Okay, so I have extra time on my hands, which not all of us really have. What can I do with that time? Right. And rather than, oh my God, it's terrible,
Mm-hmm.
because it really isn't. It isn't comfortable. And I know that, but it isn't this big, bad, scary thing that we tend to think it is, and that we're always told it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, amazing. So, in thinking about why people with chronic dizziness, chronic pain, other mind body disorders are more prone to insomnia, what I'm hearing you say is first, there's a strong relationship with stress and anxiety in general. And of course, these
Mhm.
folks have a lot of that
Yeah.
in their lives. Um, I would argue, and probably you would argue, prior to the symptoms, not just because of symptoms or around symptoms, but also it sounds like these folks also might be more likely to get stuck in some of those thinking cycles as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
And yeah, that's really interesting to think about. So just again, to kind of not to belabor this point, but when you were describing what insomnia means, the trouble falling asleep or staying asleep or waking early, does that include some of these things like jerking awake or having buzzing in their heads? Or I've heard people say they just wake up in the middle of the night and their symptoms are really bad, or they're waking up feeling
Hmm.
disoriented. Does that include those things?
Yeah, and some people wake up with panic too, right? Some people have parasomnia type symptoms, or like nightmares where you're having scary dreams, or people have sleep paralysis where you feel like you can't move. So
Mhm.
yeah, I mean it all falls under these sleep issues. Some of these things are treated a little differently depending on what they are, but
Mhm.
I think for most of this stuff, now, not for every single thing that I mentioned, but for
Mhm.
most of this stuff, what's happening is, the brain is in that fight or flight, right? And when you start to relax, it's like, oh no, you can't. And then it wants you to just jerk awake, because it's being relaxed, being calm, kind of shutting down doesn't feel safe. And that's the thing that we need to work on, is reducing that stress and anxiety reaction and the fear associated with sleep. Because there's, over time, if you can't sleep or if you have symptoms during sleep, you have a fear of not being able to
Very
sleep or having a
understandably.
problem. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
um, but your brain also needs to understand and be able to kind of really put into practice that it's okay to just let go and relax. And some of the things that we'll talk about, especially like when you're really, really sleepy, which is, what the therapy that I do, that helps you get really, really sleepy. And that need for sleep can override a lot of these other things. If we do it correctly, if we manage it in the right ways, if we have the right habits and strategies to help it, there's a need for sleep, and our body has that, like, innately,
Mhm.
right? And so if we channel it and work with it, that can help reduce some of those symptoms that pop up.
Mm. So good to hear because, as I'm sure you are even more aware of than I am, conventional treatments for insomnia are terrible and alternative treatments don't work consistently. So I'm wondering, before we go into the things that we say do work, could you give me an idea of what doesn't seem to work well?
Yeah, of course. Typically what happens when we can't sleep is we start with our primary care doctor or someone similar. We may end up seeing a neurologist or sleep doctor,
Mhm.
but that's what people do, right? Because that's the way our system is set up. And I think it's probably the same with dizziness, right? You go
Oh my
see the
gosh,
doctor,
absolutely. Yes.
and maybe they give you some sort of medication to help. And you're I think in the same boat, is you're working against this in some ways, because I'm not saying that sleep medications are, bad across the board. No, because they help a lot of people. But working on changing your thoughts and habits should be and is starting to be, I think we're getting there a little bit at a time, the first line. Because why use a medication? Why do that with side effects if you don't need to? And, the research shows that the CBT for insomnia, which is, this certain type of therapy that's really focused on insomnia, is, as effective in the short term and more effective in the long term than any kind of medication. And really, medication is the only other thing we have. So there's really these two options.
Or
And some people,
supplements that don't seem to, again, deliver consistent results.
right, like
Right.
melatonin, right? People
Right.
take that and they have a good night and then a bad night. And,
Right.
honestly, some people do well with it. And
Right.
that's
It's great.
there's no judgment on that. But why not you do something that I think is more consistent in the long term and has less side effects?
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Okay. So you mentioned that it's CBTI. That's the modality you primarily use for this particular issue. So can you just give me the basic framework? Like what are some of the assumptions of CBTI and what are some of the action points that CBTI helps you, the therapist, and the client take?
Yeah. So CBTI is really based on, like, I'm kind of repeating a little bit of what I said, but it's really based on changing your thoughts and habits around sleep. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that we may do things that perpetuate insomnia without realizing it. So, for instance, something like having a big clock in your room. I don't know, the size doesn't matter, but having a clock.
a big pressure-y clock, however big it is, that makes you feel pressure, right? Yes.
Some people have those clocks that like display the time on the ceiling and like big numbers. So
oh my gosh.
But something like that is a habit that we have. I need to see the time. I need to see it. Oh no, I only have, X amount of time until I need to get up. That's something that we do kind of subconsciously that we're not even aware is putting pressure on sleep. Another thing, and I'll get into this more, but is lying in bed trying to sleep. So we look at these kind of habits, and what I do when I have a new client who wants to work on sleep is I have a sleep diary form that asks them a set of questions. And those questions, I have a spreadsheet that I use for this, and I'll look at what their habits typically are. So what are they doing that I know can impact insomnia negatively, right? And then we go through this set of what I call the CBTI rules, the things that you need to follow to make your sleep better. And these things are not easy, and include like setting a schedule. So you have from this time to this time to sleep, and that's it. And we don't always love that, right? Because we want more flexibility if we don't get a good night, we want to push the schedule in the direction, sleep later if we need to. And that is not helpful either. So I kind of give them, and what's great about CBTI is it's very structured. So this structured set of here's what you do. And the biggest issue
actually sounds like lovely. I mean, especially in the mind-body world where things aren't always so structured, and it's like, somatic track, but don't somatic track too much, or whatever. Lots of the other tools we use are less clear gray area, more gray area. This sounds wonderful. This sounds like do this, and that sounds like it would actually give people a sense of safety too, like you were touching on a little bit earlier, that there's just kind of a sense of lack of safety and fear surrounding sleep, but also a lot of other things in mind-body disorders. So I'm sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
No, that's okay.
Please continue. Yes.
No, I totally agree with you, because there's a couple different modalities of therapy I use, and this is by far the most clear, concise, structured, and I love that about it. And once I started doing it, I was like, this is amazing, because I can really tell people do this and it works 70 to 80% of the time, which is
Incredible.
amazing.
Yeah.
No, the thing that is tricky about it is, and I don't want to, undersell this because it's not easy, right?
Yeah.
The biggest issue is people don't want to do the things that I'm suggesting. And everyone has their own reasons, and everyone has the thing that is the most difficult for them, right?
Mm.
And there's this kind of resistance of, I can't do it that way because, right? Like, and that's what they feel really attached to. And so a lot of the work is working through those things, because it's not so simple to let go of something that makes you feel safe in whatever way and really like abandon that thing and change it. So sometimes it looks a little different because it isn't so easy for everyone to just abruptly change it. Now, to be fair, sometimes it is really easy. And some people are like, you know what? I'm totally open. I will do whatever you say, and I'm not tied to any of this. And then it's kind of easy, right?
Right.
But we're we're not all like that. We have our own things that we really are comfortable and assuring. And so, yeah, it's more complicated than just this one straightforward thing, because these things that the set of CBTI rules is challenging a lot of the time.
Well, it comes back to the safety thing. See, if as you're saying, if it were easy, we would just put up a list of rules on your website, and then you could go do something else, right? And you'd say, "Hey, you're having sleep problems, follow these rules," and the people would just do it, and that would be it. They wouldn't have
Exactly.
any issues. But I think, and this is just my opinion, that having you to help them overcome those barriers and help them again incorporate these rules into their lives in a way that works for them is also creating safety for them to
Yeah.
again, that human element of creating safety around all this is probably also a contributor in why the therapy is so successful too. It's not just about the rules.
Yes, exactly. Right. They need to hear, like a little bit about why this is safe, and can you support me through this? And I hear a lot of people talk about accountability too. Is like,
Mhm.
if there was a set of things on the website, and who are they accountable, to do that? Because do they have that push to do it? Now, if you're keeping a sleep diary, it makes it, you're accountable, right? Like,
Mhm.
if you're not doing the things, no, I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to help support, right? And
Mhm.
work with you to troubleshoot, well, why is that hard? Why is this not working? Let's think about, other ways to either think about it or approach it. But yes, I think it's the accountability and the support and the like assurance.
Mhm.
Yeah. Some people
Yeah.
might be able to follow a list on a website,
Yeah.
actually. I
Yeah.
think most of us can't.
Right. Agreed. Even people who are very well adjusted need human connection. It's just one of
Yeah,
those things, right? And
absolutely.
it's just so interesting to hear you use the word diary. I have to admit, I'm having like a
Mhm.
visceral reaction to that because,
Mhm.
y- and I know you're nodding. You know exactly what I'm going to say, because in the conventional medical management world, my clients have been told, keep a diary of your
I know.
symptoms, and then we'll know what the triggers are, and then you can avoid those things forever.
Right,
And
right.
so, can you just for my own selfish reasons, can you help explain why this is different? Why this kind
Yes.
of diary is different?
Yes, and honestly, some people, it's really amazing because some people react positively to the sleep diary. So, like, just keeping the sleep diary is enough to help sleep for some people, like a small group.
Mhm.
For other people, it's like it really provokes anxiety, because, and I would say that's probably more the norm. Um, is like calling attention to it. It feels like you're putting pressure on it, or there's a spotlight on it. So what I do, this is the way I've set up the sleep diary, is it's a set of questions. It's in a Google form, and you cannot see the results. So you are not allowed to track it. And I definitely have a fair share of people who say, but I need to do that. And this is not that kind of thing. I want you to just quickly do it and forget about it, not think about it all day.
So it's like a
Because
log. It's
it's a
like a
log,
log. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
they can't even see, you know how Google Form works. They can't even see their answers
Right.
once it's sent to me. So there isn't really a time to reflect on, is it, you know, what that by the end of the day, they've usually forgotten about what they put down.
Right. Okay, I'm
Um,
calmer now. That makes me feel much calmer. I'm just imagining people with charts and checklists and graphs and trend lines. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, how
no,
stressful." I feel better now.
I manage that because, and there are some, you know, some other ways to do it, but this is the way I like to do it for exactly that reason, right?
Mhm.
Is like people who want to have that sense of control over it. Like this is not about, you know, starting to see like, you know, do I have this symptom after a poor night's sleep? I'm just trying to identify what your usual habits and routines are. That's the whole purpose of it.
Mhm.
So it isn't, you know, it's all about your experience, what you feel. There's no, like I tell people, take their sleep tracker off when you do this, because that's telling you one thing. I want you to know what you really feel is happening. There's no right or wrong. It's all about what you perceive. And so it can be activating, but I try to minimize that because as best as I can, I want to know the information. It really helps me to have it. Um, but I also like, if they're doing better and as soon as we can, I kind of take it out of the picture because don't want it to be, it's just temporary.
Right. I just have to comment on something else you just said, though. There's a you just drew the focus to someone's subjective experience or interoception, like that person's
Mhm,
perception of what's going on inside
mhm,
him or her. And it seems to me that folks are being hurt, not helped by some of this technology that puts so much emphasis on these scores and the, congratulations, you've reached your goal for the day. And I mean, again, for someone who's not going through a mind body disorder or sleep problems, that can be motivating. But for folks in
mhm,
our group of people who are listening to this, it seems like it just it puts the focus on the wrong thing. And what we're trying to do is create both, as you said, habit change and um, a, a sense of safety and a, a, a better sense of again that internal experience, being able to pay more attention to our own subjective experience and respond appropriately to it.
mhm, exactly. Yeah. And I have this example that I like to use for this, which is, so some people, you know, will come to me for insomnia help after having had a sleep study where, you know, there's sleep studies you can do at home, but what I'm talking about is going into a lab, getting hooked up, you know, they have electrodes, a nasal cannula, like there's a lot going on there. And then you're told to go to sleep. And and it's not easy, but people do this all the time. And they're really helpful because those in lab sleep studies really can detect sleep apnea, you know, which needs to be treated. Also, you know, restless legs or, you know, periodic limb movement, which is another issue sometimes people have. So being able to detect those things is important. But for insomnia, you know, it's not going to really do much for you. But what's interesting about it is in those sleep studies, you fall asleep, and it's like really the only time in your life where someone can tell you you fell asleep at exactly this time. And you woke up, you know, 8 times or 1 time or whatever it is. Someone can tell you exactly because they're monitoring what's happening in your brain. The next day, usually, most sleep labs give you a questionnaire. It says, "What time do you think you fell asleep? How long do you think it took you to fall asleep?" They're not asking you these questions because they need to know, because they know. They're asking you because they want to know what you think.
Mm.
And that's a really important piece of it. So the sleep diary functions as the questionnaire the next day. What do you think is happening? What do you perceive is happening? Not, let's be really rigid about looking at it in detail, because I don't need that information. I just want to know what you perceive.
Yeah. Wow. I really I feel like this has such broad implications in general for people with mind body disorders who also tend to be so disconnected from their bodies and their
Exactly.
internal experiences. So I feel like this would be so helpful. Now you've converted me. You've converted me. I'm okay with the diary now that they can't see trend lines. But now I'm
I'm
thinking, gosh,
glad.
just having people start to just, because this is something I'm coaching people to do all the time. I want you to notice what happens what happens inside you. Hey, when you said that to me just now about your
Mhm.
your dog, or when you told me about your boss just now, what just happened? What just
Mhm.
happened in your body? I'm constantly doing that. So you're
Mhm.
you're just you're using a tool that I think I'm using intuitively with my clients now, but it sounds like it can be operationalized in a very structured way specifically for insomnia, which is super cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad you feel converted.
I feel converted. Okay, so they've started the log and you've started giving them these guidelines, and what information does the log give you? Like, what are you looking for when someone is answering these questions?
So I am looking for a big part of it is what their schedule is. So is
Mhm,
it consistent? Are they going to bed at similar times? Are
mhm,
they, and like how long it's taking them to fall asleep? Again, what they perceive. Are they waking up overnight? Are they waking up early? What are they doing when they wake up? Are they lying in bed, just tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling, hoping that sleep's going to come? Are they checking the clock?
mhm,
And typically, I mean, one important thing that I'm looking at is wake time. So, what their schedule looks like, if it's consistent, how much time they're spending in bed. So the formula that really helps with sleep is you don't want to spend any extra time in bed. Only sleep when you're in bed. So that means not doing other things like looking at your phone in bed, not watching TV in bed, not reading in bed. Those things are all totally fine, but your bed is this kind of sacred, special place where you sleep. And then when you're not sleeping, you're not in bed. So you're not lying there awake. You're not, doing other things. And are you napping? Like, are you napping during the day? And so getting a sense of this helps because those are the things that we can change now. I tell clients we can't go back and change, the life events that might have started the insomnia, but what we can really work on is what is happening now. What are you doing now when the insomnia comes?
mhm. Yeah, and again, that's a refreshing change, I think, for people who are also mired down in some of this other work you mentioned. You work with trauma, and uh, to some extent, anyone with a mind body disorder is going to be doing at least a little bit of digging into things that have happened in the past. So this sounds like a refreshing change from that.
Yeah, and everyone's different, right? Some people like the, short, succinct nature of this therapy. Other people want to talk more about, their life experiences. And I do both. So
Mhm.
I see it both ways, but CBTI in and of itself is
Sure.
just a very structured, not focused on past experiences kind of therapy.
Right. Okay. So what are some of the big rules? I mean, so if someone's listening to this and they're like, "Okay, you've sold me. I feel like this is something worth trying." What are the big rules that they should be following to start regulating their sleep? You mentioned consistent sleep times, right? So going to bed at the
Yeah.
same time and waking up at the same time every day regardless.
Yes. And the wake time being kind of the anchor, right?
Mhm.
So if you set a wake time, let's say you want to get up at 7:30 every day. What that means is every day. That doesn't mean you get up at 7:30 during the week and then you get up at 9:30 on the
Mhm.
weekends. That's not the same thing. So really the wake time should be set consistently.
Mhm.
And I guess I'll just want to make a little side note, teenagers are very often, guilty of sleeping in because as as we get into the teenage years, we start to push our schedule later. So we're up later and we sleep later. this time that's the wake time doesn't need to be super early. Most teenagers do need to get up early because they need to go to school.
Mhm.
But the variation really throws us off. So if you're sleeping late on Saturday and Sunday, and then on Sunday you're like, I can never go to sleep on time. Well, there's a real reason for that, right? So the wake time is incredibly important, and that needs to be as consistent as possible 7 days a week.
Mhm.
The bedtime is a little more flexible because what I do with people is based on their sleep information that I'm seeing. I set a schedule. We work together. It's not like I say, you have to do this.
Mhm.
We come up with it based on their life and what works for them. But it's based on a certain amount of time. And, kind of my spoiler is it's not always 8 hours, because that's not what every single person doesn't need 8 hours of sleep. Some people do. Some people need 6. Some people need 9. It's a range. So when I look at the sleep diary, I set a range, and then you have your bedtime. So that's a goal, but you can always go to bed later, just not earlier. So if you get less sleep, no big deal. You get up at the same time. You don't push it later. You get up the same time, no matter what. And you just get less sleep. What that means is you have more what we call sleep drive, that innate sleepiness the next night. And the next night, our temptation is, if we're really sleepy, we want to go to bed early, right? But no, it's later than your time or later, and then the wake time. So that's the scheduling piece of it. And that's, I think, it's really important. It can be hard. So that's one, I think, essential piece of this. I had mentioned not looking at clocks. So it means, like, just not having access to your phone right next to your bed, not because it's a screen, but because it's a clock. Not having the time projected on the ceiling or really visible. You don't need to know. If you have an alarm set, keep it away from you. You have no reason to be checking the time. You just don't need to know. You'll get up when your alarm goes off.
You know,
Um,
my favorite purchase of, I have to say, this is the dorkiest thing ever, so I'm outing myself here as a dork. But probably one of my top 10 purchases over the last year is a vibrating alarm clock I got on Amazon. It's this little egg-shaped thing I put under my pillow. So now my phone is like, it's not even accessible from bed
I love
anymore.
that.
I just
Yeah.
put it under my pillow and I'm like, okay, it's time. It's time. The phone is gone. Like, there's just nothing holding me back anymore. And if I wake up in the middle of the night, there's no phone there for me to even check.
Those are really great. Exactly. And yeah, I think that's great. I mean, we don't all need to have that, but that kind of stuff can help for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Um, the other piece of it that I mentioned briefly, but is not doing other things in bed, right? So if you're someone who looks at your phone, kind of scrolls through Twitter or Instagram before you go to bed, that's not, I'm not saying don't do that, because that's a thing a lot of people ask. So you're saying, going to tell me not to have screens at night. And I actually don't really feel that way. I think it's more about the content. So if you get really upset looking at Instagram, don't do that. If the news is upsetting to you, don't look at the news before you go to bed. It's not the screens, it's the in bed. And this happens because we want to create a conditioned response, which means, like, when you get in bed, your brain automatically says, hey, I'm sleeping now. So we
Right.
want to create that strong association that the bed is for sleep. And when we do other things in bed, it weakens that response.
Yeah. You're
Um,
creating a brain prediction that,
yeah.
like, as we talk about a lot in our field, right? Your brain is going to start to predict sleep, and therefore you will sleep when you're in a place where your brain knows sleep happens.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. So those things, like light, easy TV or certain kinds of, screen content, I'm in support of, as long as it's making you feel calm and relaxed prior to going to bed. But in bed, you're there to sleep, and that's your job. We say sleep and sex, and that's it.
Yeah.
Um,
Any
and
TVs in the
then
bedroom?
I recommend not,
Mhm.
because then, I mean, look, we're all different, right? And when we do this therapy, like, that's a hard no. Um,
Mhm.
people can get to the point where they do this stuff, but if you have problems sleeping, it's not going to help you. Do the TV in the other room, and when you get really sleepy, start to like really feel that and then move to bed, right? That's what we work on. And the other piece of it is if you're awake in bed, you're doing it wrong. So if you wake up or you're trying to fall asleep, you don't want to spend a lot of time lying in bed trying to sleep. So you're going to get up and get out of bed, go do a quiet activity out of bed, so that you're not just staring at the ceiling, waiting for the sleep to come, because then it's not going to come. It's just putting more and more pressure on it. And if you say, hey, look, I'm going to get up and go read a book. It doesn't always have to be read a book. I'm going to knit. I'm going to like watch a nature show. You start to forget that you're so focused on falling asleep. You're doing something else, and your brain can relax actually. And then you can get back in bed and try to sleep. So what we say is a maximum of 15 to 20 minutes of time spent trying to sleep. Okay. And then, we discourage naps, but if you need a nap, short, like power nap, 15 to 20 minutes, any more than that can impact your nighttime sleep. And then, the other thing I would mention, and this is kind of the last thing, is to really give yourself a buffer zone before bed. And this is something a lot of people don't do. Like what I mean by buffer zone is like relaxing time. So if you relax by reading, do that for at least an hour before bed. If you relax by watching TV, that's okay, as long as it's not in bed, right? And it's not like a horror movie or something like that. You need to have downtime. You can't work up until it's time for bed. Homework, intense things get you riled up, and it makes it a lot harder to sleep.
Right. I completely agree. My house becomes a cave around 7:30. It just everything gets real quiet, real dim, and it's just I need a long like landing. I think of it like a landing strip, for me to just kind of come down before bed. So I can tell you people listening that does work. Yeah. So
Wind down time,
yeah,
right?
wind down time.
You transition into this new, part of the day, which is like relaxing and, letting go.
Yeah. So all of this sounds so incredibly easy to implement and practical. I mean, I know, again, not always easy to actually put in someone's life, but very straightforward. So, have you seen this help people who describe awful sleep issues? So, not just like oh, I'm just not sleeping well, but some of the things I hear our clients say, like I mentioned previously, the brain zaps, the horrible anxiety, the panic attacks, waking up in the middle of the night. Does it help with those things too?
I have seen that definitely help. I would like the message I think that we all need to understand is if you are sleepy enough, you are going to sleep. And that stuff isn't going to keep going on, because if you're up and you have several poor nights of sleep drive always wins. This is a innate need that we have for sleep. And if you're sleepy enough, it's going to push through those things. There's a lot of research on CBTI and other chronic conditions. The thing we see the most that it has the most benefit for is depression, where there's a really positive impact on depression. But also there are CBTI studies on chronic pain that without PRT or other types of pain-focused therapy, CBTI on its own can actually help chronic pain.
Tremendous.
Now, yeah, it is a big deal. So, what I don't know is if there's a study looking specifically at dizziness or the kinds of things you're talking about. But when you start to reduce the anxiety around sleep and you start to really understand the way it works and see this progress in yourself, I think those symptoms will change over time. Sometimes we might need a little more. Like there's a nightmare therapy. So for instance, nightmare focused therapy that is great, and it really helps. And it's like a little bit different than what I'm describing. CBTI is a part of it, but there's kind of some added pieces to that too. So I guess the overall point of it is that CBTI can help a lot of stuff.
That is so great to hear. Again, such simple to implement and specific tools. So before I was going to move on to the 20 to 30% who don't fully resolve with CBTI and what to do with them. But before I do that, I just have a few questions I can just hear my audience asking. So blue light blockers, are you a fan? Do you think that's necessary?
For some people. So some people have like sleep phase issues, meaning like our circadian rhythm issues, which is like they're the most common one is they're up really, really late, and therefore they need to sleep later. And so with those people, actually reducing light at night can be helpful, because light can stimulate us to feel more awake. So there's varying degrees of sensitivity to it. For the average person with kind of regular insomnia, which is kind of funny because regular insomnia isn't usually a thing, but an average person who doesn't have these other complicating factors, not really. It doesn't really make that much of a difference. Again, I know that I said this a few times, but if you're sleepy enough, you are going to sleep. It's just that we don't let ourselves get to that point because we're scared.
I love that. Okay. And that's something I really would like people to internalize here, that if you're sleepy enough, you will sleep. We have to remove the barriers to that happening. It's a natural process that wants to happen. Your body wants to happen. So our job, or your job, is to remove the barriers that are in the way. And as you said, a lot of times it's simply fear around sleep itself or other symptoms related to sleep.
Exactly.
Wow. Yeah. Any supplements that you recommend on a regular basis? I think I know what the answer is, but just have to ask. I know people are thinking it.
I don't typically recommend supplements because I want to see the behavior change first and see what that impact is going to be. Supplements can be helpful for some people. I think they're inconsistent. So melatonin, for some people who have, like, melatonin is really supposed to work for jet lag. So if you're starting to shift to a different time zone, use melatonin. It's not meant for, every night, insomnia use. But, if it helps, I don't know the specifics of the downsides. Some people have nightmares from melatonin, actually, or grogginess. So it's not, most of the time I'm trying to get people off of medications and supplements. So I'm not usually recommending them. We want that quick fix. I know we want it so much, but it's not there.
Yeah. Well, speaking of quick fix though, how long till people tend to see results with CBTI? Like how long does that usually take?
So there's a range. We say usually 6 to 8 sessions, which is not that much.
That's so quick.
Therapy. No, that doesn't always mean 6 to 8 weeks. Well, so for some people, yes, it's pretty quick. I would say for some people within a month, it's a pretty big difference. For other people, it's more like a couple of months. But this is really meant to be short term, and if it's not working after 3 or 4 months, something needs to be, reassessed in the process.
Okay, that's fantastic. So we're talking short months, not, I have to talk to you about my early childhood experiences for 5 years until my insomnia gets better. That's really good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah. Some people will have like something come up, a life event where the insomnia then comes back, and they'll, say, hey, can we meet again? I just feel like I need that refresher. That happens. And it happens, with pain and other symptoms too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But once they know, usually this is like, they can go back to it, over and over again. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great. So, okay. So now I think I'm ready to ask about this then. So it works for most people, and 80% is a big, huge number. Like that's in our field. I mean, that's in any kind of medical condition, that's an incredible success rate.
Mm.
But that does mean that there are some people who don't get better from that. And I'm wondering, just the thought that's coming to my mind is, does this have anything to do with what we were talking about earlier about this creating safety around sleep?
Mhm.
Like, are these the people who generally don't have a feeling of safety, and so therefore just working on their thoughts and behaviors doesn't give them a sense of safety?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of times I think it's people too who feel like, I've heard this quite a lot actually. I need to lie in bed and read. That's how I wind down. And, we'll try to do the lie in bed somewhere else, but they are just not lie in bed, read somewhere else.
Sure.
But it's that. I think that's the biggest barrier is this kind of set of resistance to, I don't want to do it that way, or I don't think I can do it that way. For the most part, if people do this, there's some level of improvement. If they really kind of fully embrace it and can let go of the, feelings of, I don't know about this. I don't think I can do that. Because
Mhm.
we feel like we need it this way or it's not going to go well. And that is a, very rigid way of thinking. And that can put pressure on sleep, which then makes it very unlikely to happen. But in general, yes, there are exceptions to this. There are people who do things, right and still struggle. I'd say it's not that common. It happens. Um, but those are also the people I think who want it to happen quickly and who want the quick fix too. But there are medications in that case. If you go through and you really give CBTI your all,
Mhm.
with looking at those resistances and working through them, yeah, medication is a fallback.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, where I'm going with this is I'm wondering, also kind of coming back to some of the things you were saying about rigid thinking. What I tend to see is my folks who have difficulties with this kind of rigid thinking are often like have
Mhm.
ultra controlling tendencies, and that's related to a general sense of like not feeling safe at
Yeah.
all in their lives. And to me, that implies not necessarily needing to go to the medication route, but actually really needing to explore some of the roots of that, the lack of safety in general. And I'm wondering if you've seen that be a factor for
Yes,
people.
I have. And
Mhm.
that's why, I definitely have. And I've worked with people who have sleep issues and done, another type of therapy I do is called EMDR, which is a
Mm, mm,
trauma-based
sure.
therapy. So I will pull in other tools and like, mindfulness type tools to try
Mhm.
to help, people get back in touch with their bodies and what does it mean to have a sense of safety and do like kind of like a somatic tracking around those issues. So I like to be able to pull other tools into it
Mhm.
because even though I love CBTI, it's not like a one size fits all kind of
Sure.
thing.
Well, it's like you're saying, I mean, the rules may work, but if someone can't implement the rules, it's not that person's fault.
No.
Sometimes people are not able to. They're not able to because it feels so threatening to them to have to change their routines, or the levels of anxiety in their bodies are just it's just so high that it's not it
Mhm.
habit change is not, it's really just scratching the surface of what's really going on underneath. So it sounds like that's not the majority of people, happily, which is wonderful because that means that many people are just going to be able to implement these tools we're talking about and start working on this. But it's also good to know that for some people, it can be really hard to implement these rules. And then we can look at why it's so hard.
Yeah, exactly. And what I would do in that case too is try to work on one change at a time
Mhm.
just to get used to it, which makes it a longer process, but there's no rush,
Right.
right? I mean, and that's the thing, like putting pressure on anything makes it harder to accomplish. And
Mhm.
so with sleep, it's absolutely true. If those nights where you have to get up early, you have like a flight or something like that, and you're like, I need to go to bed early, I need to go to bed early, you're not gonna go to bed early. So putting pressure on it doesn't help. So, if someone's really having a hard time, what I would say is just start with one of these things that feels the safest, right? And just start there and start to slowly implement it until you feel like it's feasible and manageable and you start to feel safe. Then add another one. So do it in a slower way.
Mhm.
We're not all the same, and you're right. Of course, it's not your fault. People have layers of things going on in their lives that create these circumstances, and we can't fix it all in one approach, but just so I adapt it is the
Mhm.
way I would do it.
Sure.
It's just do it in a little bit of a different way.
Sure. Okay. So to sum up the tools we've talked about, we've talked about just kind of noticing how our thoughts and these fear spirals are affecting us. It's kind of
Mhm.
the education piece of understanding that there is this natural sleep drive and we just need to get out of its way and
Mhm.
sleep will come, right? We talked
Mhm.
about some practical things like going to bed or at least getting up at the same time and trying to go to bed at the same time, getting out of bed, not staying in bed for long periods of time when you're not sleeping, using your bed just for sleep and keeping
Mhm.
maybe clocks and other sources of angst out of your bedroom. I love that I just called a clock a source of angst. So any other tools that you think would be helpful ones, like keeping your room cool
Mhm.
or any
Mhm.
like lighting or sound, anything else?
Yeah, those are good points to bring up. That's more of like what we think of in terms of sleep hygiene, right?
Mm,
Which
mhm,
is, an important part of it too, but usually we start with the other rules.
mhm,
Um, yeah, so a cool, dark, quiet room is optimal for
mhm,
sleep. Doesn't have to be ice cold, but it's very hard to sleep when you're hot. Your body temperature has to cool in
mhm,
order to fall asleep. So
mhm,
we do want to keep it cool if you can. And dark as you can make it helps. We're a lot of us are activated by light coming in, and so if you have the ability to make it as dark as possible, that helps. Um, if you live in a place that's noisy, so like, I don't know, New York City, other places that tend to have a lot of background noise, and it makes me laugh because when I lived in New York, I had one of those disc alarms that you're talking about, the vibrating alarms that went under the pillow because I would always wear earplugs.
yep,
Yeah. But earplugs and sound machines are helpful if that's something that's interfering. And a sound machine is great, right? I mean, that can drown out some of the noise. So those things can really help.
mhm,
Again, if you're sleepy enough, you're going to sleep no matter what. But these are added benefits to just help, help have a more comfortable and sleep friendly environment.
mhm. Yes, yes, and I could see also how just like we were talking about this brain association between your bed and sleep, there some of these other little tools could be part of a ritual, part of a
Mhm.
a a ritual that helps your brain associate sleep with what's about to happen. So even if it's something that's not necessarily super sciency, like using an essential oil or
Mhm.
have,
Mhm.
a warm washcloth or
Mhm.
doing a little, like, not an intense, but like a little yoga stretching routine before
Mhm.
bed consistently,
Mhm.
those things could also potentially become associated with sleep and help
Yeah.
bring that like, ramp you down to bed.
Absolutely, like a good wind down routine
Mhm,
that cues relaxation, right?
mhm.
So any of those things, yeah, whatever you like to do that feels relaxing.
Yeah.
You know, I would say my stance on meditation is that it's obviously wonderful. I love
Mhm.
it. But if your intention with meditation is to try to fall asleep by the end of it, then it's again putting pressure on it.
Pressure.
So if your goal is, I just want to do this to relax and wind down, great. And there's a lot of evidence that, well, one study I know about looks at progressive muscle relaxation and helping with nightmares. So there's a lot of positive associations with, meditative, mindful exercises like that before sleep. So I love that as long as your expectation isn't, I need to fall asleep. Uh, I need to fall asleep by the end of this or else I'll feel anxious.
Outcome independence, just like
Right.
we talk about in many of our other pieces of work, right? Yeah. Yeah, I could totally see that because in a way, it's almost a game. It becomes the opposite problem when you start. I meditate. My meditation time is before bed, and I have to fight to keep myself awake because once that sleep momentum starts creeping up on me, I'm just like, what was it? Like I'll start falling asleep as I'm meditating. So that's because I'm not using it to try to go to sleep. It's just it's part of my relaxation and wind down time. But that's a really good point. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Wonderful. So, wow. Okay. So I think you gave us a ton of practical tools. And I think I already know the main takeaway, but I want to give you another chance to reiterate it because I think it's so important for people to hear. So if people take away just one thing from our conversation, what would you like that to be?
I think, the overall message is that if you don't sleep tonight, you will sleep the next night. And if not the next night, then the night after that or the night after that. It will happen. And we want it not to be a big deal. You're going to be okay. You're going to be tired, but you're going to be okay. Sleep will come. We really have to just take the pressure off.
Oh, fabulous. And it's not going to interfere with your chronic dizziness or chronic pain recovery.
That's correct.
You're going to be fine. Oh, Annie, that's wonderful. Again, I took away so much from this conversation. I also, it's made me feel even less anxiety about sleep. I didn't even come into this conversation thinking I needed a therapy session, but now I'm like, I feel so relieved to have had this conversation with you about my own sleep now. So for anyone who would like to work with you, I know you said you do work by telehealth. So can you work with people anywhere or just people in the DC area?
So I typically work with people in, DC, Maryland, Virginia. I'm also licensed in Florida.
That's where I am.
That
Yeah.
is? Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
Some states, during COVID, a lot of states like waived their telehealth rules. So what I would say is if you're interested, reach out to us. We can always check and see if, what the state's rules are. I want to abide by them, but sometimes they allow for temporary therapy or there's things that they allow for.
Okay.
So I would encourage that. And then the other place to look for someone who can really help with this is the Society of Behavioral Sleep Medicine, which is people who are trained how I am in behaviors related to sleep, who really get this and have more kind of advanced training in it.
And I mean, hats off to them, but I have to say that it's so wonderful to also know you have this training in chronic pain and other chronic physical conditions. I think so, as we've said so many times in this conversation, people feeling comfortable with you and feeling like, oh no, she gets me and what I'm going through, and her other clients have gone through the same thing, go so far in creating a good therapeutic relationship. So I hope that people who watch this, who are able to work with you, can reach out to you. And I'll include your contact information in the video description or the podcast description, however people are hearing this.
Thank you so much. Yeah. I'm glad to put some of this out there.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm so grateful to you for coming on and talking to me about this. I think again, this is such an important conversation and it's going to provide people with so much help. Thank you.
Good. I'm glad. And I'm really grateful to you and what you do. And it's so important and so meaningful, and it's reaching such a wide audience, and it's amazing.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I love doing this. I think it shows. And lots of people need our help. So we're going to help them however we can.
That's true.
Thank you. All right, Annie, take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And for anyone watching or listening, if you have questions or comments, you can drop them below. If you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening to this podcast, you can head over to my YouTube channel to comment. And of course, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel as well. All right. Take care. Bye.